Unmuting. How have you been the last week? Have you been thinking about 1992 all week?
Well, I've given some thought to it. Certainly, the Super NES launch and all that, and I guess what impact the PAL conversion process would have had. Even though I don't really have any direct experience with
Mm-hmm.
these games in that state. I don't think.
Does the Super Nintendo Online app offer a PAL option?
It doesn't, yeah, because this is topical, of course, with the N64 games in the expansion pack having just emerged. And in that case, there was some initial panic because, the reveal trailer kind of showed the PAL boxes alongside some games that were the North American boxes. So it's like, oh, God, if it's a game with a lot of text, is it going to be PAL only or whatever? But as it turns out, it's simply an option for some games, and you
You
can see
know,
the
if you want to play Ocarina of Time both with input lag and at 50 hertz.
it's it, you wonder, don't you? You wonder what sort of experience that makes for, or yeah, I guess it's not here with us yet, but F-Zero X, I guess,
Oh,
is going to be
yes.
interesting. I've never had the pleasure of F-Zero X compromise, but yeah, that could be interesting. But
Sure can.
yeah,
Uh,
we have basically all the Super Nintendo kind of launch plus, I guess, isn't it? Because
yes. Because
obviously
we're
it's
delayed. Yep.
yeah.
So here's what we're looking at for a European launch window on Super Nintendo. We're looking at 50 hertz F Zero.
Yes. So yeah, I'm struggling having not actually experienced it for myself, and just how much I should sort of knock off for this. Although I feel pretty strongly that it has to be something because it really is such a big deal in that case. That was really what was impressive about that game. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we had F-Zero eventually. It wasn't one of the first games we had when we had a Super Famicom a year before NOE released any of this stuff. It was a little bit later on that we sort of came back around to it. But I mean, it's the sensation of speed and the smoothness with which it achieves that, and really. A lot of other kind of Mode 7 type racers, I don't know whether they ever really did it as well as F-Zero did it in terms of
Not
that
really.
feeling of speed. I mean, I think obviously a lot of the time that wasn't necessarily the goal.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Mario Kart or some of the imitators of Mario Kart, that's not the point. But I've never felt like I saw anything that kind of really. I mean, even it's not a racing game, but Hyperzone from HAL, which
Mm.
is like a kind of hybrid of F-Zero and Space Harrier kind of gameplay. It could use with being faster. Like that is the main thing I get. It just it's a similar effect. It's somewhat kind of effective, passable, but it just doesn't have the same sensation. So I think if I was just scoring F-Zero, I'd probably give it an 8, even though it had limitations for
Mm-hmm.
a launch game in, I think, because it was a launch game, I believe, for the Super Famicom, so it was actually
Yes,
from
so in Japan.
1990 originally. It was actually getting a bit long in the tooth by 92 in a way. But yeah, because there's no multiplayer and stuff like that. But I played it to death. I loved it. So I think even despite the limitation, going 8, and then it's between a 6 and a 7, but I'll go 7. Just on maybe it deserves less if I'd actually
Yeah.
seen what this does to it, but I'll go 7.
So GX in the chat is getting at what I was about to get to, which is the next two games were re-engineered to be 50 hertz optimized, but they
Yeah,
did not do that for F Zero, the game that you would think desperately
yeah,
needs it.
that's the thing. I mean, with some games, maybe it was just more difficult in some way, some sort of
Maybe.
challenge. I mean, I guess the one thing we should say as a global thing for all PAL Super Nintendo games is by virtue of the fact that it had a separate processor for sound, the sound was the music was not slowed down the way that like a Mega Drive game would be
Yes.
slowed down from its Genesis version. So at least it had that whatever PAL game you played, you would have the music intact. Whereas with Mega Drive games, the
It
sound
was hell.
and we we had a PAL Mega Drive eventually, kind of years later, and mostly for sports games. And even having not played, the North American equivalent, some of the music that you had in stuff like Madden '92 just sounded wrong, like intuitively. And of course, by virtue of being aware of import issues and all, you kind of quickly put together why it sounded wrong. So yeah, at least we didn't have that. But yeah, that's interesting. So Mario World is optimized, but the intro is not. So
Yes.
that is interesting. But yeah, of course, what that would mean a lot of the time in terms of optimization is that you would essentially be correcting for the speed, but that would mean still there was still a sort of price to be paid, because it would be essentially like frame skipping at that point, aren't you? Because
S-
the
yes.
display is still not obviously, 'cause this is the way that the most televisions in Europe were at the time. Although you did have TVs on the market at this time that could display 60 hertz. It just wasn't necessarily their usual kind of use case. But like, obviously we had one that could display NTSC correctly. But yeah, so even if it's the correct speed, what it will then be is it'll seem a bit kind of jittery,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a, how do you want it? Do you want it so it seems relatively smooth but it's slower, or do you want it correct speed and it's sort of got this jitteriness to it? Not a great trade-off in any event. But Mario World, great game. The first Super Mario game that I played, funny,
Mm-hmm.
and oh, I mean, it was magical. So even if it's a bit compromised, but not seemingly too badly, I think a 9 will stand on this one.
Okay. Pilot Wings.
Yeah, interesting. I've played the. I didn't play it at the time. It was one of those ones that always I thought looked cool. Like, oh, I'd like to have that, but it just, the import expense and all that, it just wasn't gonna happen. Basically, it did seem like it was probably a little bit too slight as a game,
Yes.
from what the reviews said, to merit paying the full whack in that case, that imports kind of demanded. But I always kind of thought, oh, it'd be interesting. And I played Pilot Wing 64 years later, but it's quite different being a fully polygonal 3D game and all the rest of that. So, going back to it on virtual console and stuff, you kind of see what it was like. And yeah, it's still got some of that kind of tech demo, or kind of feel to it, in terms of showing the various ways in which this could be used. In terms of, sometimes it's you're kind of behind a plane, but then sometimes you're kind of a top down, and all the different kind of ways it's trying to show it off, and the rocket bell and all these things. So I think it's quite good, but it's not the deepest thing in the world. So I think I'll go with the 7 on that one.
Okay. Sim City.
Yeah, no experience with this at all directly. It's one of these things that I played a little bit of a PC version of it once upon a time. I can't even remember how I had that, whether it was like given to me or what. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, from what I understand, it's quite a significant like reworking. They really,
Oh,
because it
yes.
is Nintendo kind of pushing this. You have Mario references in it. Bowser is like the sort of kaiju that comes and like destroys stuff, for instance, and all that. And so it wasn't just like, oh, let's shoehorn a kind of ill-suited game for console onto the console and be done with it. But I'm sure there were kind of accommodations that had to be made on that basis. Where the game was not going to be everything that it was on PC at the time. So I think probably another 7 is in order for this, in terms of, it sounds like it, kind of they made the right kinds of effort, but it wouldn't necessarily be entirely successful.
Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. It is optimized, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean, it probably not one of the games where it's going to be the most kind of sensitive to, any kind of hitches in the display or the being slower. I mean, look, everything is,
I mean,
it's
like shield timing, but that's like the most precise thing.
yeah, exactly. It's always going to be a drawback, but relative to certain other games, I would have thought it's kind of not one of the biggest ones, but the game itself is excellent. Again, first Zelda game that I really played in its entirety, everything about it, and really first game of that. Apart from had experience with things like Simon's Quest or some things that had a bit more of an adventure kind of element to them, but the scale of this and all that was really something I wasn't prepared for when we this was the first American Super Nintendo game that we imported, because of course playing it in Japanese would not have been great, and so it was I think it was in 92 because it was a 91 game in Japan, but it was in 92 that we got our first converter that could it was a simple converter because it was just the shape of the cartridge really
Yep.
that was different between Super Famicom and the American Super Nintendo. Played it to death, absolutely loved it. It's is it between a 9 and a 10? That's the only question I've got to ask myself with it. I'll go with a 9.
Okay. I'm curious, with some of these beloved games that are gonna be clearly suffering, even in small ways, from the 50 hertz conversion. I'm curious what our next 10 is gonna be that breaks through that.
Yeah, it's true. It is kind of and that's the thing. I mean, look, you could say the same thing with Punch Out, which we did before, and obviously, but I played, that's it. I played the PAL Punch Out. I personally, especially because when we got that game, I was not even 4 years old. I was kind of blissfully unaware that it
Yes.
was slower, and the fact that made it easier was probably a good thing for a child that small, because Punch Out is not the easiest game in the
That
world,
is true.
to say the least. So that's the thing. I mean, for some people, and that just even as a child, I was on both sides of this in terms of like just enjoying something like regardless, unaware, and then on the other hand, actually seeing how it was meant to be. So
Yep.
yeah, it's going to be messy and kind of somewhat contradictory, but that's like baked into an exercise like this.
Yes. Mario Paint. Speaking of
Yeah,
things
so
that don't need to be speed corrected, really.
yeah, well, I suppose that's fair, especially because I mean, like, again, it wouldn't have affected any of the kind of music, the musical
And
elements of
that
the
mouse
game.
was not 60 hertz sensitive.
He wasn't updating the cursor that often anyway. I guess it's kind of funny in a way. It must have seemed a little bit odd, that because you did have quite a lot of, for whatever reason, PC ports or PC inspired games in the Super Nintendo era quite early on. But and of course over in the UK and Europe, the mouse was coming out quite soon. But elsewhere it took a while to come out, and it was only with something like Sin City didn't get to benefit from it or anything like that. But the Mario Paint was another one of those things that I would always have liked to try, but didn't get the chance. So it seems like kind of charmingly kind of both limited and sort of what admirable in what it manages to achieve within the sort of constraints of Super Nintendo, but I really can't say too much about it. But I think a 7 is going to have to be the score.
Okay. Speed corrected Super Mario Kart. I think the only main thing that suffers here is that the times it gives you are incompatible to compare with lap times from the other versions.
Right, so it's not like for like, but it's still not the full slow down. It's not that much
Yes.
slower either. So, I mean, obviously, Super Mario Kart as compared to F-Zero is a slower game anyway, and a different kind of game in terms of how it's trying to kind of the gameplay is more based around interacting with the other cars and with items and obstacles on the course and stuff. So I mean I can imagine it doesn't suffer too much in this sort of, especially with there being an optimization for it. And I quite like Super Mario Kart. I didn't have it at the time. It was one of those ones that it's just, again, it's like, well, we already have a racing game that we really like, so another one is kind of a luxury. That's
Yes.
the way it was when you import in. But having come back to it and enjoyed it on Virtual Console and stuff, there's something it's a very particular aesthetic with Super Mario Kart. It's before the kind of renders and the
Hmm.
character style got
Donkey
nailed
Kong
down.
Jr.
Yeah, exactly. And just the Katabe art, and then the sprite work inspired by that. I quite like that. I think an 8 is probably where I'd go with that.
Okay. Honestly, like again, outside of the hurt slowdown, by waiting a year, NOE was able to launch with Mario World, Link to the Past, and Super Mario Kart within the first calendar year.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you got to space out some really big hitters here in a relatively short period of time and just sustain that momentum. I get the downside is, of course, that Mega Drive had even more time to kind of
Yes,
bed in and get popular here, and it
exactly.
was kind of uphill, a bit of an uphill struggle to get that, get a foothold when Sega did, they had a better platform because Master System was more relevant and it came out pretty strong in the
Yep.
early years of Mega Drive.
Super Tennis.
Yeah, so we had the Japanese version of this early on, with in '91, I think. Just because I think they give similar
Whoop.
sort of thing to like having golf on the NES in terms of like people in the household like tennis, so it's like let's have this, and it reviewed well. In the magazines reviewing imports back then. So again, as we covered, I think sort of tangentially last week, it was not a Nintendo developed game or not something that they published in Japan. So is it Tonkin House or whatever?
Yes.
But it was one of these games that they kind of picked up for outside Japan to say like this can be a pillar of a sort of catalog, part of the catalog of ticking certain boxes that launch console or near launch kind of console games need to have. You need a sort of range of sports games. This was one of them, and it was pretty good in its original form. Obviously, kind of a little bit different style to what you get years later with Mario Tennis from Camelot in terms of you're far more likely to be able to like hit it out of play and all this. So it was, it could be. It took a bit more getting used to, especially for me. That was my first tennis game, but once you did, I played it quite a lot, and it was pretty enjoyable. I believe the Western versions there was a few changes in terms of the Japanese version. Clearly had caricatures of real tennis players at the time, so they didn't have a license, but they, as often was the case in Japan at the time, they just kind of felt like, no one's going to really notice. No one
Yep.
really cares. We could just put, so there was like Wagacy instead of Agassi and like
Yep.
Lendu instead of Lendl. And all that went away in the
Sure
Western
did.
version. Also, there was a thing when you lost a match, or indeed if you beat the computer or whatever, the losing player would like be smashing his racket into the floor with the big red letters of shit above his face. Like just like again, Japan. I guess this is like not too long after McEnroe's heyday, so this sort of showing off is like pretty synonymous with tennis. But yeah, I believe I believe I saw this on someone's PAL Super Nintendo once. It was changed to rats. They were saying
Yeah.
rats.
I bet.
uh, yeah, so it was a pretty good tennis game, but certainly for the lack of swearing, it's not going to get an 8. I think I'm going to go with a 7.
Okay. Super Soccer.
Yep, same again in terms of this is a Japanese game that they kind of picked up. And of course, soccer being a bigger deal here, it makes even more sense than it did for the US, although they did it for the US as well, I believe,
Hmm.
didn't they? NOA
Yes, they did.
published this, but yeah, NOE had this, and yeah, it was in a pre-existed series called Formation Soccer, which in Japan I think may have started on the PC Engine, and it had this sort of format where it was rather than being sort of from the side on and kind of just looking at the field that way, it was actually behind a goal, and the camera would kind of push forward and back to follow the action, which I guess in one sense it was a good fit for the sprite scaling approach that the Super Famicom would offer. But, to show that off, I'm sure it worked more smoothly and kind of looked better than it would have done on something like PC Engine.
Mhm.
But it is a problem for actually playing a soccer game because it's inherently sort of asymmetric if you play two player. Someone is defending a goal where you can see it very clearly, and then someone else is going to be defending a goal where it's like off camera until you get close enough to it and stuff. So it's a weird one. It's also there were sequels to this that played a lot faster and better. But the first one was definitely a bit slow, and like the ball, like you was just shooting, like the ball was in the air for ages. But I guess that gave you a long time to like actually, if you like press the D-pad, it would enact spin on it to like swerve it in and stuff. So it kind of worked, but not altogether. It definitely got better, but those games never came out in the West. Like it was
Mhm.
only this one because again, the whole thing was we want a soccer game
Yep.
to put out there at the launch, and this is what's available kind of thing. So it's on NSO, so you can kind of check it out. So it's a certain amount of fun, but I think a 6 is probably appropriate.
Okay. Super R Type.
Yeah, interesting. We had this. It was kind of one of the things you're looking for from Super Famicom is like, okay, like these games, like Master System had a version of the original R-Type, which was pretty impressive because it was on a bloody Master System. But it couldn't really approximate the detail
Oh,
of
it's a Master System game. Yes.
yeah, because the even the original R-Type, especially R-Type 2, they had really quite detailed visuals. Like they were very much sort of going for the Giga-esque thing, and like as much as an arcade game could do that at the time. And so it was kind of oh, okay, now you can get graphics of that quality on the Super Nintendo at home, and kind of obviously people loved in the arcade R-Type 2 as well. Super R-Type though is not exactly R-Type 2. It's quite different actually on a number of levels. I mean, there's an opening level that is just seemingly, as far as I know, like entirely original. It's not something that appears in R-Type 2 at all. And then a number of the other levels are quite heavily modified at the least from the kind of concepts that you saw in R-Type 2. So it's a strange thing. It's this it's not really a port, but it's not an entirely original game either. But I guess it's mostly famous for being very very difficult and having some real performance problems.
Yes.
So R-Type is a more slow-paced shooter than something like Gradius, and of course Gradius 3, had already come out and was had some serious performance problems. But like I said, naturally that's a faster paced game. So in some ways, I don't think it necessarily hurts Super R-Type as much, but it still hurts it. And there's still I fundamentally I think the R-Type kind of design and the kind of skill set with the force thing that you shoot off and bring back and kind of mix defense and attack that way, and the way it's all put together, like I think it's really the R-Type games are really quite, the classic ones are very strong, but this one doesn't quite kind of bring all the best of that to the table. So tough one. I kind of torn between a 6 and a 7 on this. I think I'll go with a 6.
Okay.
It's a little harsh in some ways, but
Super RC Pro Am.
yeah, no familiarity with this.
Not for
And
Super Nintendo. Game
yeah,
Boy.
oh yes, and indeed still no
Yes.
familiarity with it, even though that.
Disregard the fact that it opens with Super.
Yeah, exactly. Especially being the neck detail. But the one thing I've really got to wonder about this, looking at it as a prospect, is what the view, how big was the view for this kind of game
Ooh,
on
let me
the
look.
Game Boy?
Yeah, let me look up a
Because I
screenshot.
mean, isometric games on NES, that kind of style anyway, it's they could feel a little bit cramped as it was. And then I'm going to
Oh
project that
no.
to a Game Boy scenario.
So, okay. So the bottom, I'm gonna say 20% of the screen. By Jix, bottom 20% of the screen is your HUD, uh,
Okay,
which
okay.
is opaque. And then the top, uh, 80% is about enough to see one corner of the track.
Yeah, this it just sounds ill-conceived.
I'm I'm looking at this poorly rendered Canadian flag because they don't have enough pixels to finish the leaf. Uh,
you gotta make concessions.
yes, so no, this seems, as you said, maybe refrain, to sort of take something that was, a hit on NES, and now let's give it to the Game Boy. But some things just didn't fit, and Yep.
seemingly this was one of them. Let's go with the 3 on that one.
Okay. Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. Speaking
Interesting.
of,
Yeah, this is an interesting game in terms of how it adapts an NES game. It is kind of, I guess, perhaps the best way of putting it is like it is an adaptation of the NES game, because it's not a port. It's
it is
you know
an.
the graphic
Yes.
the graphics are quite different. A number of things are quite different about it, but equally it is essentially, kind of the structure and the scope of the game the
Mm-hmm.
same as the NES original. So it's yeah, I believe we mentioned this when I was talking about the original Kid Icarus. It adds some things in terms of making the like jump controls and the like controlling the descent of Pit as he comes down from a jump more friendly and more sort of precise, more
More
finesse.
more standardized, like more informed by a few more years of game design.
Exactly, yeah. That's a lot of it, isn't it? You contrasting, '86 with the early '90s. A fair bit of kind of progress and just kind of coalescence around what was expected from some of these kinds of jump physics and stuff. So it benefits from that. The graphics are kind of a bit of got they're a bit more style to them. In terms of like cartooniness rather than the more kind of it was in that sort of early Famicom kind of black background utilitarian kind of
Oh yeah.
look that the original had. So in most respects, I think it's kind of and it had a wraparound feature to
Y-
the to,
yes,
to
it
the
did.
levels that went vertically upwards as well. So I think in most respects it's an improvement on the original Kid Icarus, but if you were playing it as a sequel, it's kind of like it doesn't really move the ball down the field, like and go places that the original didn't go. It
Hmm.
just kind of goes the same places, but a bit better about doing it. So I think a 7 maybe for this.
Okay.
But yeah, obviously I played it on Virtual Console years later, but
Look, mhm.
I quite liked
It's the last game in the franchise that won't put you in the hospital, so
it.
there's something to be said for that. Um, Metroid 2: Return of Samus.
Yeah, again, didn't play it at the time, and hadn't had yet to play a Metroid game at this point. I hadn't played the original, so it was one of those things that the only chance I would have had to play it would have been if a friend had it or something. But unlike something like Castlevania, where it's like, I know that, I want to try this version. I didn't have that frame of reference for Metro
Yep.
2, so played it years later. There's a retroactive about it where you could hear my sort of thoughts in full. There's it's a very kind of conflicting emotions with it, because there's things I like about it. I think are really quite impressive about what it's doing with a Metroid game on Game Boy, but there's a lot of things I don't really think work. I mean, I really like the Spider Ball, but like as a power up,
Hmm.
I love where other games took it in the future, like in Samus Returns, the remake, or in the Prime games. But
What
yeah,
are
it's
your
a bit.
feelings on a game about committing genocide?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. I guess it's kind of, it's another one of those Metroid games with, even though the original Metroid was coming out right around the time of Aliens, they wouldn't really know, have seen that film when they made it. So this was the first Metroid game that anybody made after Aliens, and that was kind of, nuke the whole planet and kill them all.
Yes.
It's basically taking that premise but getting hands
How
on
many
with
planets
it.
have been destroyed in the Metroid franchise? I have to know.
It seems really like, is it just me or does it just come out of nowhere in Dread?
Yes.
Like, normally there's some sort of setup for why the planet's gonna blow up. It just it just happens. It's just like, well, you know what to expect by now. This is obligatory. Just go with it. It's very anyway. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna go with a 6.
Okay.
In some ways that's harsh. In some ways it's generous. Like
Yeah.
there's so many spaces in it that don't feel particularly designed, and like I said, the spider ball is kind of great because it lets you do a lot, but equally that's not great because you could end up like wasting a lot of time just like
Yes.
rolling over ceilings and stuff. But yeah, that I
It's true.
get the best I could sum up my mixed emotions is with a 6.
Um. All right. So Yoshi on Game Boy. The cons versus the 3 out of 10 NES game. I don't think it has multiplayer. The
Nice.
Pro, it's portable.
Yeah, I mean, I can at least see it making a more legitimate bid for your attention as
Yes.
a portable game, like when it's
I'm
like
gonna
not
fact
necessarily.
check that.
Yeah, but then yeah, you're losing multiplayer. I guess we'll just go with the 3 again. Either it kind of
Okay.
swings roundabouts, kind of.
Um. No. List of Game Boy games with link cable functionality. Yoshi is absolutely not on here. This is a very small list. Holy cow! I did not realize it was that small. Um, Kirby's Dream Land.
One of the relatively few sort of Kirby classic games I've not played at this point.
Oh,
It took me a long time to get sort of into Kirby, but once I did, I thought, I started going back and playing. Obviously, the Game Boy games, of course, like they didn't show up on like Virtual Console until you had 3DS Virtual Console
yep.
for them. And there was that Kirby Anniversary Collection on Wii, but that was so late that it was like pretty much the same time as Virtual Console on
That
3DS.
was that was like 2 3 months before Wii U.
Yeah, exactly. So it didn't really bring it. Look, the anniversary is when it is.
I
It's
mean,
in
yes.
it's in '92, but the Kirby kind of was born. But it's always it would have been more appealing to me if it had come sooner because it wouldn't have just been, oh, here's these games you can get on Virtual Console, because the portable games didn't have that representation yet. But so no, I've played Kirby's Dream Land 2, Kirby's Adventure, Kirby 64, Kirby, the
Mm-hmm.
Superstar, or the is it Fun Pack in Europe? I guess we're going to find out. But I think with this one, based on everything I've heard, it's a perfectly pleasant and solid debut for Kirby, but he doesn't have the copy powers yet and stuff. So it's kind of maybe a 6.
Okay. Keeping on the Game Boy train, Magnetic Soccer.
I am utterly oblivious to this. Yeah, what magnetic soccer? Is this in the kind of tradition of like some of the futuristic kind of sports things? Speedball, was a relatively big deal over here.
Well, this
Or
is a European exclusive, and look at that terrifying fucking box art.
all right, let's do it. Let's. Oh my god, yeah. It sort of looks like, what if we made foosball look entirely unappealing? Like, I guess that is the
With,
best.
let's call it very, Germany circa 1920s, like, not in terms of racism, just in terms of, like, style of child's toy.
Yes, yeah. I get it's basically. It does actually, it does say here, doesn't it, that it was. I'm just looking it up because I genuinely had not heard of it, and it makes sense because it says here. Although it was an official work of Nintendo, it was obscure title only marketed on German store shelf. So there
Yep.
you go. That because you would have thought like a something to do with soccer probably would have shown up in the magazines or whatever. But if they didn't even
I
release
mean,
it
it's foosball.
here, even
Yeah, no,
yeah,
apparently
it
this is
is that.
Germany only. You are right. This is
Yeah.
Germany only.
So, no, exactly. That is it's kind of surprising to me, I guess. Look, Germany was the home base of
Yes.
Nintendo of Europe, is the home base of Nintendo of Europe, so it kind of makes sense. If you were going to have something only come out in one country, it would be that one. It's the biggest market. It's your base market and all that. But yeah, having real no basis to say, but equally I've got my doubts about how enjoyable it could have been as a magnetic sort of four. Let's just go with the four.
Okay. Mega Man, Dr. Wily's Revenge.
Yeah, so the only thing I've ever really heard about these Game Boy Mega Man kind of adaptations is that, they get better eventually.
Have you not
Like,
played them?
I have not, no.
Oh, they are weird because they are mixing and matching concept and not just bosses, but stage elements and concepts from all of the different console games up to the point of those games' development, usually with like one or two Game Boy exclusive bosses. Like,
Yeah,
they're
I
weird
seem to
remix
remember.
versions.
I seem to remember that it's supposed to, around about Mega Man 4 for the Game Boy is where it starts to get like more
Unique?
substantially kind of, the particular
Yes.
to Game Boy and then Mega Man
3 and
5 as
4,
well.
yeah. Yeah, 3,
So
5 definitely is like, I think, almost wholly unique.
they have been kind of things that I've had like on a list on my 3DS to kind of buy and play
I might
at
want to
some
get on
point.
those sooner rather than later. With the
Yeah,
rate
kind
they're
of.
trying to shut down stores.
Yeah, it's going away. So just annoyingly, it'll be just as a way of adding funds to my Japanese account. The Switch will be going away, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I definitely want to play those. But presumably, in the early phase, it wasn't necessarily as kind of successful. It's more kind of a compromised version of the NES kind of experience at first, and then it eventually gets more of its own thing and more kind of confident. So I think maybe a five for both these two, both Dr. Wily's Revenge and simply Mega Man 2.
Okay. Well, Mega Man 2 with Roman numerals, just so it's obvious that it's not Mega Man 2.
Not that Mega Man 2. Yeah,
I mean, they
so
can't literally call it not that Mega Man 2. I mean, they could,
it
but,
would it would have been
like,
good though, wouldn't it? The
yeah.
big Mega Man 2 on the box, and then parenthetically in tiny letters, not that one.
Um, and then finally for the year, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
If I have no direct familiarity with this, but I feel like, and this could be just because of the name, or I could be conflating it with something else. I feel like this is mildly infamous or something. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, it's not great. Let me double check. I mean, it's based on a 1978 American parody film.
Yes, but that's weird because there was Return with George Clooney in the 80s. Yeah, so like I've not seen them, but I think that it did get another Killer Tomatoes thing got a kind of new lease on life in the 80s
Oh
when they did the
no.
sequel and yes, it's a trivia thing that Clooney was once in it, but in terms of how it's a strange choice for it seemingly for a Game Boy game, but I guess other than it's just got, I guess the title kind of plays into the way that particularly boys were marketed to back then.
Yeah.
It's kind of quote unquote edgy. It's kind of like icky, if that makes sense. Like all the
Yeah,
kind of
for sure.
gunge and the crap and all that. Yeah, but you know, I, the only vague impressions I have in my mind are that it was rubbish. But
Yes, no. You are right that it is considered rubbish.
so let's just go with the three and
Okay.
be done with it.
All right. Wow, a perfect 6 average for the year. 6.00. All right. 93. Um Kirby's Adventure for the NES.
Oh yes, well, yeah, this is pretty incredible for an NES game, I've got to say. To get back to my Kirby origin story or whatever, I I think it was the first Kirby game that I really kind of delved into in full was actually Kirby's Return to Dreamland, or as it's known, Kirby's Adventure
Yes.
Wii over here. And it was I was really quite surprised. It was like a crazy deal or whatever, because you don't get crazy deals on first party Nintendo
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But it was a good deal, and I thought I'll try it, and I was surprised how much I liked it. And then it's like, okay, well, let's go back, and then went back to Kirby's Adventure on the Virtual Console, and I was really surprised at just sort of how much of that Wii game was kind of in that NES game. You know, like in terms of just the range of copy abilities, the graphics, the scenarios, even the crazy kind of end boss like stuff. Like it's all there. Like the Kirby formula is there by the NES game, and yeah, they've obviously embellished it and done some things, you know, subsequently that are really kind of impressive. You know, I've really like the 3DS games as well and stuff, but this is really good. So I think we'll go with a 9.
Okay. Now that we were done with that, get ready for one of the fucking weirdest years. Almost every single fucking one of these things is what the hell was happening in 1993 specifically. So, first we have Tetris 2,
Yeah.
the
So
sequel to Tetris. The first sequel to Tetris, there are a lot of sequels to Tetris.
yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting that in Kirby's Adventure obviously was very late everywhere, wasn't it? But yeah, some of this stuff that we're going to get to is stuff that is just like NOE just getting round to for some reason. I guess I don't
Yeah.
know. Did the NES like have this weird late flourish? Even though obviously we're in '93 by now, we're knee deep in the 16-bit,
Oh, yes, but
post-war.
they
But
sold a whole hell of a lot of these things. So, you
yeah,
know.
I guess it just demonstrated that there was still an appetite. And again, it may have been like uneven across Europe, like certain territories within Europe, maybe, had kind of experienced a later adoption or interest in the NES than others. But it is interesting. Tetris 2 specifically, I really have no idea how this differs in any material way from the other versions.
Uh, I think there's just more modes.
Yeah, I mean, it's Tetris. I assume it's pretty, unimpeachable fundamentally on that basis. So I'll go with an 8.
Okay. Ho! Time for a European exclusive. Mario Brothers open parentheses classic series.
So we sort of teased this, in an earlier episode because we talked about the original Mario Brothers port and how didn't it get a better version?
Yes, this is sure the oh shit, that port was bad, we're gonna do it again.
So it's just so random that it actually came out. I mean, it's so like the horse has bolted territory.
Yes.
It's kind of baffling. On the basis that presumably is somewhat better, I'm pretty sure it is, and also the fact that it's just so weird. I'll give it a 5.
Okay, counterpoint. It's 7 years later than the 3 out of 10 version.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, in some ways there's an argument to go lower on that
Yes.
basis, but
Yes.
I am going to give it credit for being somewhat better. Presumably it is. I don't know.
It is.
And B, just the fact I'm going to give them credit for doing something baffling, as opposed to arguably the more sensible thing to do is to not encourage that kind of behavior and punish stuff like this.
Mega Man 4 followed almost immediately in Europe by Mega Man 5.
Yeah, so this is them mopping up where I guess Capcom
Just
couldn't
stopped.
really see the value.
Oh, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that Europe.
Continuing to release those. I mean, Mega Man 4 I've not played much of. I've played it a little bit. I've got the Mega Man Legacy Collection on my Japanese 2DS.
Hmm.
It was very cheap on there once, so I have those. It's nice on the 2DS. It shows you that NES games can look a lot better than they do on the Virtual Console for 3DS because it doesn't have the pixel accurate kind of display option for NES games. It does for Game Boy, but not for NES. And those games look kind of muddy as a
Yes.
result. But on the Legacy Collection, they look really nice. So Mega Man 4, not really too sure how it's kind of not the most fondly regarded, I think, because
It's
you
after
had some,
3.
yeah, 2 and 3 were sort of set a high bar, and then it's probably straining a bit to do something novel, and you have
They're iterative.
the charge shot and
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff that so yeah, and obviously it's not really that creative, so I think perhaps a 6 for this one.
And then for 5?
I have played 5 relatively. I played that all the way through. I actually finished it probably about a month ago on my 2DS. It was a very gradual playthrough, because you could just sort of save in that version and just gradually work my way through.
Hmm.
But yeah, I quite liked it. I mean, it wasn't. I don't know whether I'd say it was something that seriously kind of challenged maybe 2 or 3, but I still thought it was pretty good. So I'll go up to a 7 on that.
Okay. Battletoads and Double Dragon.
Now, yeah. So this one, I guess it did. I feel like I definitely saw this get coverage. I'm sure, again, as we've mentioned a number of times through this exercise, with the rare factor, with Battletoads, probably got more coverage than they, particularly deserved, maybe. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't just a British thing. Like Battletoads is quite famous / infamous around the world or elsewhere, anyway. But yeah, I think isn't this one of the better regarded Toad's efforts in that it's kind of just an out and out brawler rather than pissing about with other styles.
Yes, because it is a crossover with Double Dragon in that sense. Yes.
Yeah, because obviously I think again I only toyed with it a little bit in Rare Replay, but with the NES Battletoads game, that everyone's so familiar with the Turbo Tunnel, it's like it's a brawler sometimes, like, but it's too often it's not, and it's doing things that it's less good at. So I would have thought this at least has some benefit from that. So maybe a 6.
Okay. NES Pac Man, which released in Japan on November 2nd, 1984.
So does this tie in at all to the sort of thing about with the Tengen in the US and what was going on there? Because I'm struggling to understand why this is coming out. I
So,
mean,
Tengen
Mario's pretty
did put out the first North American NES version.
right.
Um, so yeah, this is 1984 in Japan, 1988 in North America. It was then re-released in 1993 in North America, and then at that time, Nintendo of Europe says, "I mean, it's never come out in Europe. We should probably just scoop
Yeah,
it."
it was like, oh, actually, yeah, that sounds like an idea.
Except the NES version of Pac-Man is fucking bad. It's
Yeah, it's tough. It's not really anything that seems particularly kind of inviting. I mean, I certainly do like classic Pac-Man. I think fundamentally, it's still a strong kind of classic arcade game, and it represents that to an extent. But it's just we're not talking about a particularly good version, and B, like really ridiculously late. So I think a 4 for that.
okay. On to the Super Nintendo. Battle Clash.
Battle Clash. Okay. I'm not. I can't say as I'm particularly familiar with this. I was hoping once we got to Super Nintendo, I'd be some of the
Sorry.
things that I actually know. But it's
Nope.
yeah. Let's have a look at this. So, oh, yeah. Well, we've covered this in the past. Why I wouldn't be? It's a Super Scope
Yes,
game.
it sure is.
Yeah, I mean that is going to make it tough straight away because I wasn't in love with those sorts of games back then, But more to the point, I think, I mean, certainly, like I said, wasn't any realistic likelihood of us getting a Super Scope because it was kind of like had the Zapper, wasn't in love with it, whatever, been there, done that kind of thing. But also, it just looked big and stupid to me. It didn't,
You
like
don't
that
want a
didn't look
fucking bazooka.
it didn't look appealing at all to me. So it just, yeah, and that equally, having said all of that, these sorts of things, it could have been a fun game. You know what I mean? Like, I really
Yes.
don't know, but it's one of these things where it just, yeah, as a prospect, I wouldn't have been sort of attracted to it at all. So I'm just gonna go with a 5.
All right. Now for two games that you'll recognize easily, and then back to some bullshit. Star Fox, which came
Yeah,
out in Europe within the first year and a half of the console.
yeah, that's the crazy thing, isn't it? And one of the things that was really crazy to it is the fact that we imported Star Fox, we played the Japanese version, we loved it, but it seemed so soon that it was like that it was being covered in Europe, and
Argonaut.
there was some they did like a demo event or something, like hyping it up, like, oh, come and like a high score contest or something, and I can remember thinking, oh god, like compared to when Mario World, the difference between that seemed like an eternity as a quite a young kid, to like this, it was like the next day almost. So it was kind of a shock. What I have no familiarity with is what the kind of PAL thing did to Super FX games, because obviously they run very slowly and sort of staccato anyway. So, and also they were bordered naturally. That
Yes.
because Star Fox was already running in this little box. Now I am thinking, like, if you bordered the borders again, like how big was this thing?
Um, one, it was not great, and two, 50 hertz apparently just really ups and underscores the slowdown. Apparently, I have not watched 50 hertz footage of this. Maybe I should. Apparently, it is hysterical to watch.
Yeah, I mean, because it was even in its full form, and obviously, like, it's been a while since I played it on original hardware with the Super Nintendo Mini and the
Mm-hmm.
NSO versions, but and they're probably not that accurate in terms of the frame pacing. I think that's one of the
Yes,
areas where it's difficult to get it exactly right.
because you don't really want it exactly.
No, they're certainly, and they're fine. I played those versions and enjoyed them, but yeah, I do have to wonder what it is. I absolutely love this game though. Where I played the Japanese version in '93. Just again, it was there was a heavy element of getting swept up in kind of the hype and the it's doing things that you've not seen on Super Nintendo before. It's like arcade type stuff, and the Mega Drive can't do it. There was definitely a heavy element of that, but equally, it was if you could get past all the kind of performance limitations, a pretty solidly put together rail shooter. As well, and also for me, I think it came at a good time where I really liked stuff like Gradius and R-Type, but it's kind of like you were starting to feel like that was
Playing out.
you'd seen it, you'd done it, So the fact that this was taking that and that going, literally with another dimension to it, I think it just came at the right time for me. So if I was scoring it based on the regular version, I'd probably be thinking about an 8 or a 9. But with
Mm-hmm.
this, I think we're going to go with a 7.
Sounds good. Also, hello to new people in chat. Um, Super Mario All Stars for the Super Nintendo, 50 hertz.
Right, yeah. And I mean, yeah, that's. Because I believe I don't know if maybe there was some sort of correction for. I think they might have overcorrected for in the original Super Mario Brothers, in the sense
Yes,
that
the audio got fucked up.
yeah, the music's too fast, like and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know how this
I
works out
think
for
this is.
comparison.
I think this is as corrected as you're gonna get for 50 hertz.
Right. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I quite like, the All Stars stuff. I think the biggest thing that it does in a lot of ways is that it makes lost levels more digestible because
Yes.
so like they have the save feature, and in the original Super Mario Brothers, the way it works is that you save after a world. So if you beat a Bowser castle, you can then save, and it's like, okay, now I can restart from 3-1, 4-1, whatever. But with Lost Levels, Super Mario Brothers 2 for super players in Japan, they let you save level by level. They
Oh,
they
yeah.
know that this stuff is kind of ridiculous, and so
Yes.
you're going to be crawling through it. And yeah, that to me, like it's a whole other, because I did play Super Mario Brothers 2 in its original form as one of the Hanabi Festival import games
Yeah.
on Wii Virtual Console, and I got pretty deep. I got to the seventh world, but God, it is the rage of just like, when you kind of have to beat the three levels that you have beaten before, but they
Oh,
are
yeah.
still really difficult to even get to the bit you're stuck on. It's so yeah, the All Stars adding that in, the ability to just go level by level with that game, which is, there's some satisfaction to be had from playing crazy hard Mario 2 levels. Some of them are just like wacky bullshit that just doesn't make any sense. Some of them are just like fundamentally okay levels that are just really precise. So there's like some good difficulty and quite a lot of bad in it, but still, it takes something and makes it digestible in a way that it wasn't before. And then of course you have nice version of the USA Super Mario Brothers 2, and nice version of Super Mario Brothers 3. But of course it didn't quite replicate the kind of movement of the
No.
first two either, which is a bit, that's a shame. I feel like it really should have done.
Yes. Nope. The physics
So
changed.
yeah, for this, I think, it's a lot weird amount of things to balance here in terms of just like you've got some excellent games collected here, some nice visual audio kind of upgrades, some the save features, but then also we've got some PAL issues and some weirdness and all that. Difficult to balance. I think we'll go with a 7.
Okay. Alright, now we're out of the normal games. Metal Combat Falcon's Revenge.
All right, this is, yeah, we're looking this up. I mean, who is Falcon in this scenario, and why does he need revenge? I don't know.
I don't know, when you search Metal Falcon, the first thing you get is Metal Falcon and Winter Soldier Shield. Because.
I see, I see. So we are still solidly in the tranche of super scope things. This was essentially a
Mm-hmm.
sequel to the aforementioned
Battle.
Battle Crush, but
Sure it is.
we're getting it closer together because it's on a lag. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to go with the 5 again. I think for this,
Alright.
there's not.
An intelligent systems game not released in Japan.
Yeah, that's got to be a rarity. But I guess it was this feeling of like, oh, the Westerners, they love shooting games,
Yeah,
so
they love the guns.
that's what it's all about. We've got to produce it for that market.
NCAA basketball for the Super Nintendo.
Hmm. Yeah, this is interesting. I would say. I think the most interesting thing about this is that an NCAA basketball game would have been released in Europe. I mean, it's
By Nintendo.
certainly by Nintendo. I mean, I would say certainly in the early 90s, there was quite an explosion in awareness about the NBA in the UK, because all the kind of the dream team with the Barcelona Olympics in '92. Just the renown of Jordan and the Bulls, the dynasty they had going, it was filtering over in a way that the NFL kind of had this experience in the 80s more. In the 90s, it did start to happen for NBA, and of course you had stuff like NBA Jam, kind of came out in the arcades and got ports and was quite big. So basketball in the NBA, yes, a college basketball game is a little bit of a tougher sell, I would have thought, but I guess presumably it was just a function of the fact that the basketball as a whole was getting more recognized that made somebody think that this was something worth doing
Mm-hmm.
for the European market. And again, there was probably some variations across Europe in terms of, who was getting more into basketball at different kind of rates, because I think there's countries elsewhere in Europe where it's kind of a bigger deal than it is in the UK.
Yep, makes sense.
But the
So,
game itself, I really, I don't know anything about it or that it existed. So I am a little bit at a loss for kind of accounting for that. I mean, so let's see. Yes, in Japan, it was a HAL published game,
hell yeah.
and then although it says it was developed by Sculptured Software, who did they give us some of those LucasArts things on Super
I
Nintendo?
think so.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, interesting case. I really don't know what to make of it. I will go with a 5, but I regret that I can't offer more.
All right. Vegas stakes. What do you say to 50 hertz gambling?
Well, it's better to have more time to make proper decisions about what sort
Oh,
of
yes, exactly. You
to
got it.
do. So this is this not HAL as well?
This
Isn't it?
is.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I guess we're in the the Nintendo of Europe publishing HAL stuff.
I mean, Kirby
Y-
did well, so why wouldn't you?
yeah, just pretty much the same thing. There's there's a crane game in Kirby's Adventure. I mean, there's I've heard a little bit about this because it did come out on the Virtual Console. I remember
L-
it being discussed on. I think might have been discussed on RFN before I was on
It
RFN, so I
it
didn't know.
has Super Nintendo voice acting, which means that the game likes to go Vegas stakes.
Oh dear, it's yeah, I think it I it's so long ago, but I feel like TYP talked about this once. Maybe it was on an episode of Radio Trivia,
Mm.
or maybe he was actually on RFN, in those days, and when they had the 3 tier recommendation system
Oh
with
yeah.
the recommended for everyone, recommended for fans, not recommended. And so I think it had some merit for what it is. I'll give it a 6.
Sorry if you hear police outside my window. They're not coming for me. NHL Stanley Cup for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, again, I mean, I guess like
Is the NHL a big deal in Europe?
I mean, again, it's certainly in certain parts of Europe. Obviously, that not the UK.
Yes.
It can produce excellent hockey players. Who are generally more Northern Europe, of course. But
Yeah.
here, it never really broke out the way that like the NBA and the NFL did in terms of being on television. I mean, there was some television coverage in the I think late 90s, early 2000s, kind of late at night, you filled some of those hours of programming like other North American sports did and stuff. But I mean, I think games wise, especially by this time, you'd had the EA games, had probably come out, and I think a lot of the EA games just did well over here, sports games, whether the sport was big or not. I think the EA brand, to some extent, started to carry that they were just
Mm.
good video games. They got reviewed well.
Mhm.
And a lot of people probably, might have got into or become aware of something like the NFL because of Madden over here. First and foremost, it was a good video game that people liked, and then that kind of made them aware of the source material. And I think that probably may have been the case with NHL as well. And I guess this is just maybe I'm not sure because I mean EA did put their games on Super Nintendo, but they weren't generally regarded as well. Were they? They were made more for the Mega Drive first, and the
Yes.
Super Nintendo versions were kind of a bit compromised and not as good, and they didn't presumably sell as well. And anyway, so but with this, I get you're just trying to have there's some market for these sorts of sports games, and you're trying to kind of get something out of it. But I really don't know much about it, so it's gonna have to be a 5, I think.
All right. Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing for Super Nintendo.
Yeah, no, so yeah, Nigel Mansell this would be very UK centric. I feel like this. I mean, and Formula One is quite popular across the continent as well, but it's certainly a very big deal here. Nigel Mansell was a British Formula One driver. I mean, it always stuck out to me being someone who likes Star Wars because, like, when you drive an F1 car, you have a number to identify in the car, and he always had red 5, like Luke Skywalker does,
Mm.
when his call sign for the battle against the Death Star in the original. So I always remembered that. Yeah, but he was, he's a pretty big deal relatively for people who like Formula One. In terms of the merits of the game, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would have been reviewed and covered in the old days, but not something that ever really was in consideration in our household. Even though there was quite a lot of watching of Formula One in those days. But yeah, I couldn't tell you how good it is.
Mm.
So let's see. Probably a 5 again, I guess, is the only logical kind of thing to do.
All right. What if we published another Battletoads game this year?
Yes. So
This
now we're
time,
getting.
it's Battletoads in Battle Maniacs for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah. So I mean, it, I'm trying to remember exactly because this one, like I said, I feel like I feel like I remember reading about Battletoads and Double Dragon, but this one just completely passed me by somehow. I really.
There are way too many Battletoads games, especially in 1993.
Yeah. So I think it's just going to have to be another 5 for that one. I'm not. I don't think the very little I've got is that it's not a great that hasn't got a great reputation,
Yeah,
and
you'd be right.
it's something I just don't have enough information to make any more of a detailed kind of call on.
All right. It apparently also came to the Sega Mark III.
What? So just in Japan, like on
It
that.
seems to have been published by Nihon Falcom in Japan for the Mark
That
III.
sounds like some weird bootleg shit. Like, that is way out there.
Hell yeah, I love it. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
So yeah, this is the kind, and I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have got to this point in the calendar, and we haven't yet seen some of the sort of efforts that NOA made with RPGs, have we?
Oh no, not at all. Like,
So this
is this
is
the?
the first time that they've kind of got on this train of like NOE,
Yes.
of trying to sell the European customers on this kind of game. But of course, the
Hmm.
game itself was something that was developed very much with the American market in mind.
Yes.
Like, oh, it's too much, this JRPG business for American consumers, so we need something, a bespoke product that kind of waters it down a little bit, and it appeals to them. So it's kind of reviled in certain quarters, I guess, as a result of that. As this kind of, for people who they didn't want the diet version of JRPGs. They just bring them over the way they are, and we'll enjoy them. So it's got kind of a lot of baggage around it. I don't know, having not played it,
Mm.
how well it would be evaluated on its own terms. I think it's got some cool music though. I think there was some stuff in theatre rhythm, curtain call,
Hmm.
that was quite nice. So
It's got some like rock music.
yeah, I guess again, trying to appeal. Not that, like, kind of some of those sort of rock stylings weren't in JRPGs, but
Oh yeah.
maybe they felt like leaning into those was another aspect of like appealing more
Yes,
to the
presumably.
Western market. So yeah, I'm just gonna go with a 5 again on that one.
All right. On to Game Boy. Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins.
Yep. So this is another one of those games that I played on a friend's, on an available Game Boy at school one day because, of course, by this point, played Super Mario World, loved it, and kind of had read, coverage of about Super Mario Land 2. Yeah, that it was kind of more like a portable Mario World, much more so than Super Mario Land had been. That wasn't really approximated like Mario 3, or it was more a sort of weird approximation of the original Super Mario Brothers, perhaps. So I was quite excited to get like a chance to play it, and eventually, I did, in snippets, really, isn't it? It's not going to be an in-depth playthrough, but although it's not the hardest game in the world. I probably saw quite a lot of it back then. And then, of course, once the Virtual Console comes along, I got to play it in its totality. And it introduces Wario and all sorts of interesting things. But generally speaking, I like it. It's a little bit of a weird fit on the Game Boy in terms of
Yes.
it's not. It is trying to sort of approximate some of the things they were doing in Mario World, which don't ideally kind of fit the Game Boy, in terms of like the screen dimensions and flying and various things. And it certainly seems like it's having a bit of a struggle to manage all this stuff, but it does pull it off in the main, I think. So I think I'd go with a 7.
Okay. The Game Boy version of Yoshi's Cookie, which was the first to release in Europe by a long shot.
Yeah, so this has a number of versions over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's a Super Famicom one.
There's an
There's
NES, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy.
Yeah, and then there's the sort of GameCube one in the puzzle collection in
Yes.
Japan, which presumably was based on the Super Famicom one or
Mm-hmm.
something. But yeah, this is at least I think supposed to be somewhat more interesting than Yoshi as a puzzle game.
Yes, it sure is. It is
Yeah,
not. I would not call it a great puzzle game. I would call it miles ahead of Yoshi.
yeah. So it's kind of it's something I was going to be. So I've thought about having that puzzle collection over the years, but never did get around to it. With the Panel de Pon was
Mm-hmm.
probably the bigger draw, really. That's like the version they've got. It was basically Pokemon Puzzle League, but having Panel de Pon put back onto it
Yes.
in that GameCube version. And then Dr. Mario on that is basically Dr. Mario 64, which just showed up on the expansion pack because I believe it didn't get released on the N64 in Japan.
It did not.
Dr. Mario 64. It only showed up as part of that
Which means
collection.
it's not in Japan's expansion pack.
Yeah, I mean, they could just put it as an import game, right?
Oh,
Why not?
Japan does it. Japan's too proud to import. Every good idea from Japan originated from Japan. They have never looked to the rest of the world for inspiration or import.
Fair enough. Well, but yeah, with Yoshi's Cookie again, definitely not going to go as low as Yoshi, but not too much to go that much higher either. But I'll go with the 5 on that one.
Okay. Link's Awakening.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Not the kind of thing that was really you know short form enough for me to get a sense of from
Oh,
playing
yes, of course.
at school. So it really did have to wait until the Virtual Console all those years
Well,
later.
that was the one with color.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the version that I played in full, and I don't know. Kind of other than the color dungeon is generally regarded as sort of extraneous and stuff.
Yes, but presentationally is really the core difference.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what it would have been like just playing it in black and white and all that back in the day, but I mean, still, just projected back, it's kind of remarkable. It's a lot more successful, I think. I still like Super Mario Land 2, but in terms of the idea of bringing so much of the flavor and the substance of a Super Nintendo experience to Game Boy, I think Link's Awakening, while it's got a lot of differences from Link to the Past, I think it does it quite a bit more successfully. than did Super Mario Land 2 for Super Mario World. You know, well, I guess some of it is just the fact that it's a kind of, you do the screen by screen kind of thing with Game Boy, and it's fine. With some the way some of the levels are kind of the map is handled and everything, the pace is a bit slower,
Mhm.
and it's just it's hard to imagine how they could have done a better job of putting Zelda on Game Boy at that time. Really,
Fair
I
point.
just it's not that that makes it a perfect game as as a whole of it, but just as a
Yeah.
general effort, I think it's remarkable in that way. So I think a 9 for that.
Okay. Kirby's Pinball Land.
Oh, I like this. I do like this. Although I notice we haven't had Revenge of the Gator. Is that? Oh,
Um, was that 93 in Europe?
I don't know. No, I mean, in did we or did we? Have I just forgotten? I feel like we hadn't done it yet, but maybe we did, and I just forgot. I'm sorry. Uh,
Let me check. I may have totally.
no, it's probably more likely that it's me completely forget because it would have been
Um,
back in '89. Oh, sorry, '90.
it was, yeah, 90. Did we put it there?
We
Oh
probably
no, I did in fact miss that game. So you are right. Let's do that now.
yeah. Well, they are connected, of course, because they're both
Yes.
HAL Game Boy pinball games. Revenge of the Gator.
How
I
did I
played
miss
that
that?
on. I, I I would be fairly confident that that was something that I would have played again on Toy Day.
Mm-hmm.
But also on Virtual Console, and it's obviously it's not the most advanced pinball game in the world, but I still enjoyed the physics kind of work within somewhat limited, and the table layout, and just the sort of this weird choice of theming. Like I think in Japan it's called like the 66 Gators or whatever. Like just completely,
Um,
it's a weird name in
uh,
English.
yeah, it's strange. Strange.
Yeah, so I think with Revenge of the Gator, I'll go with a 6
Okay.
because why not?
And
But
then for
because it
Kirby's
gives me sort of
Pinball Land.
I mean, Kirby's Pinball Land sort of, definitely is a significant evolution, more kind of complex kind of tables and sub games and like Kirby accompaniments, like bosses and references and all this stuff. It's really quite good. Obviously, it's still a Game Boy pinball game, so the robustness of the physics and certain things you could poke some holes in. But I think an 8 for this one.
Okay.
For me. I do like pinball a lot, so
Yes.
for some of it.
Top rank tennis.
Mm. So trying to remember, is this connected? Did we do a top rank tennis for NES before, or
Um,
it was something similar, wasn't there? Where that had a
yeah.
couple of real players or whatever. But
Let me go double check. We've got looking through all our different years. 1990. We've got no. We just got tennis there in 91. Doesn't look like we have a tennis. 92. Top players tennis.
top players, there you go. Well, it's close, but I'm
Yes.
guessing this is just distinct rather than particularly kind of based on that or whatever. Looking at it now, the
Oh, real
box.
quick.
Oh yeah.
I I am gonna go ahead and re-delete Revenge of the Gator because I remembered that was not published by Nintendo of Europe. It was
Oh.
published by HAL Laboratory in Europe.
Right, because this is before it would have been
Mm-hmm.
before it was kind of their integration or
Yes. Okay. I.
but it's just funny because like obviously this particular year that we're covering is like
Yeah.
NOE publishes everything HAL,
Yes. So
uh,
that's
so it's like
why I was losing my mind because I'm like, how in the hell would I have forgotten that game? And the answer is because it was not
doesn't
Nintendo.
qualify, doesn't qualify. No, well I'm sorry for leading you
No, you're
down
totally fine.
down that rabbit hole a bit, but it's kind of important to mention it because
Yes.
it does sort of is the predecessor to
Yes.
Kirby. So yeah, top ranked tennis. Looking at the box and stuff, I feel like I do remember this being covered a bit, but never played it or anything like that. Well, it had a respectable reputation. I
Yeah,
think a
it's fine.
6 for that one.
Okay. All right. What do you think, Greg, about another Battletoads game?
Battletoads in Ragnarok's world. Okay, I mean,
What about Battletoads, but this time it's on the fucking Game Boy, and the
it.
Battletoads are huge on the screen.
Yeah, I think that is the real problem. I mean, it is when you doing a sort of character-based game, where the character is really important. That was the temptation, and obviously, even something like Metroid Two fell into this trap. And with a Game Boy game where it's like it was always better when you didn't go over the top. I mean, there's a couple of things like the black and white Game Boy Bionic Commando kept the character nice and small, whereas the Game Boy Color Bionic
Yes.
Commando Elite Forces like went for the giant character and all that. And generally speaking, in my
And
experience,
this is mostly just a port of the NES game. This one.
yeah, that's the thing. When you have something that was already existed, it's kind of like, oh well, people need to look at that character and see that it looks as detailed or whatever as it did in this other setting, and so that made the decision for them, I think, a lot of the time, but it was usually not to the benefit of the gameplay. I mean, I think
Oh,
that's
yes.
the other thing that's important to remember in terms of where we are in history here is this is the age of the primacy of the screenshot. Like that's what people have to go on, right? People bought these things based on seeing screenshots in magazine or the back of the box or whatever. It was when I got to see a game that I didn't own or that wasn't being played by someone else on television. It was like manna from heaven. It was special, like
Mm-hmm.
because there wasn't. I mean, I guess round about this time, '93 there was you started to have more video game television programs. There was quite a few different ones, competing ones in the UK. Games Master on Channel 4 and Bad Influence on ITV. That's what it was called.
Great. Lovely.
Yes, it's like we're leaning into this counterculture thing. But like it was most of the time you were making decisions based on screenshots, and for Game Boy games, that's I'm sure had way too much influence, and I doubt it did this Battletoads game any favors.
Nope.
So let's go with a 4.
Okay. Ms. Pac-Man on Game Boy.
Yeah, I mean, I like I played the sort of arcade Miss Pac-Man on Xbox, and it's kind of fairly nice kind of remix or kind of spin iteration of the original Pac-Man. But Game Boy, I mean, I'm assuming the maze would have to scroll on that.
I don't think it does.
Oh, so they actually did what I would consider to be the right thing,
Um,
and actually just zoomed out at least, and so that it's
let
all there
me
at once.
let me check. Would you believe it? It is hard to search for specific versions. I'm looking for any fucking screenshot. No, it scrolls. It scrolls
Yeah, I
because
mean
it has to have a huge HUD.
yeah, not a surprise on that basis. So, I mean, portable Pac-Man is kind of an appealing. It continues to this day to be an appealing prospect, but I'll go with a 5. Might be generous, but I'll go with it.
Um, Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing for the Game Boy.
Yeah, I've got to think. So it would appear that this is something that was kind of something that was just on all as many formats as it could possibly be on. Basically, not starting console specific, but probably computers and then
Yep.
moving on
Well,
to
not
everything else.
NES, just Super Nintendo Game Boy for.
Yeah, yeah, which is kind of a little bit against the grain with this weird little surge in NES games, but
Mhm.
Game Boy seems like a tough, to do an F1 game unless it was like a completely different style of game. Because I think the Super Nintendo, what I saw there just then was like behind the car kind of view, which you can imagine doing on Super Nintendo, but Game Boy, I mean, I guess there was the F1 game from earlier that was that HAL that that did that a few
Yeah, I
years
think
earlier.
so.
I doubt the people making this would have had the understanding of the Game Boy Hard. I mean, I know years had passed, but you do wonder how well that would have carried over, to be honest. So, just as a bit of a little bit of a projection, we'll go with a 4 on that. So, it'll come down from where the Super Nintendo one was.
Okay, and that puts us at a 592 for the year.
Just
Uh,
a little lower.
yes. Don't worry, we've got a hell of a lot of Super Nintendo in 94.
Yes, we should be getting more into what I feel like I'm a little bit more on solid ground here with this.
A little
So I guess
bit.
the problem with so much of the NES things that I was just so over the NES by
Yes.
93. It was sorry, just
Don't worry, you're getting the NES games through 95.
Okay, well, and we do start with one.
Yoshi's
Here, don't we?
Cookie for the NES.
So I'm gonna guess that we've got some multiplayer that kind of
Yes, yes, you're getting multiplayer.
yeah. So that maybe is a bit of a help in that regard, but it's not portable anymore, so it is a bit of swings and roundabouts. I'll go with a 6.
Okay. What about the Super Scope 6, Greg?
See now, that sounds like something that should have been coming out earlier.
It sure does.
I don't get that. We've had these because that's the thing that caught me by surprise with Battle Clash. It's kind of like Battle Clash. What's that? Oh, it's a Super Scope game. But I wasn't expecting Super Scope games yet because I thought we would have seen this.
No, no, Nintendo of Europe decided, let's put the hardware out when it's ready, and then we'll release the shitty bundle software later.
That's an interesting choice, I have to say. I mean, yeah. So, God, I mean, I'm gonna go with a 3 on that one. That's just very strange. I'm guessing that Super Scope sales were better than they thought, or something. And they just
I
like, oh, let's go back.
Yoshi's Safari.
Yeah, this is one of the more famous Super Scope games, like in terms of like that I could actually remember its name anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very, very strange product.
Yes.
I don't really get it.
I really genuinely had thought that at the very end of the Wii's Virtual Console life, they had put out like Duck Hunt, and they had rigged it so that you could use the Wii remote.
That was Wii U. Was that Wii U Virtual Console?
Maybe it was Wii U Virtual Console. I remember it was it was pretty late. I'm really surprised that they've never tried to rig up the game using Yoshi.
Yeah, I mean, he's got Yoshi, he's got Mario. I think Bowser's in it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
the Koopa Kid, the Koopa Links.
They do use they were mostly sort of absent after Mario World, but like they were present. But it just I never really got this. I've got to say, I love Yoshi. So I always take notice of things that had Yoshi in it, but I just kind of, again, averse to the shooting, the light gun games in general, and the Super Scope in particular. That form factor and everything just seems, like it's just over the top, isn't it? It's just like. I'm sure Sega was to blame in some way with Menacer or whatever. I don't
Yes.
or at least I'd like to think so. But I don't know about the merits of the game.
It's
Conceptually,
whatever.
I'm not big on it. Go with a 5, I think.
All right. Maybe we can just skip this next one. Who cares? Super Metroid.
Yeah, Super Metroid. Really, I mean, it's funny because it reviewed rather well, over here in the magazines and stuff, but not quite as well as you might expect in retrospect. In terms of as it's often pointed to as one of like the games of the generation, maybe even an all-timer.
Yep.
It wasn't really reviewed as such then. It was it was obviously sort of is a victim of the absurd sort of score inflation and kind of practices around that time. But a lot of the time, if you were a game that was something that was made by a kind of named developer that obviously had resources put into it so that it looked good and sounded good,
Hmm.
it was almost like a lot of things got like 90%, as was often the scoring structure back then. It was in these, and it was just like, how many above 90 do you get? Like
Yes.
it's like, well, Street Fighter 2's got 98%, but Super Mario World's got 96%. And it's just,
Yeah.
you kind of like, that was the scale, especially for some of those early Super Famicom games, because again, I guess there's the graphics and sound were doing so much of the heavy lifting. But with Super Metroid, if it gets like 92 or so, it's like, well, clearly I'm sure it's good, but like maybe I'm not sure. I didn't play the original Metroid, so we didn't have it at first. And actually, we ended up playing this the first time through because a friend of ours had a PAL copy,
Hmm.
and we just got the first adapter that we could get. So quite a few. It was 95 by the time this came around. That we could play PAL games, but at full speed and full screen through this
Mm.
adapter on our Japanese hardware. And so that was how I played Super Metroid.
What a
In
weird fucking setup.
Yeah, it was the PAL version, PAL cartridge, but essentially not the PAL version. And it just, there's no borders, ran fine, and it was really an eye-opening experience. I was it's kind of surprised at just how much I loved it. The atmosphere, everything about it. The gameplay, having just no real experience. Yeah, the closest thing I would have played like it was Simon's Quest, which at that time probably felt like a lifetime ago, even though it
Yes.
was a few years. And also, it's quite different design-wise and quality-wise and things like that. So yeah, just earth-shattering, really. I don't know how much of an issue any of the PAL stuff would have been if he was actually playing it on PAL hardware. But Super Metroid is not the most like action kind of like dependent Metroid game. Like I
The
get,
wall jumps are really tight.
that's true. That might have been an issue. I mean, that's probably because it was weird anyway. Like that,
Yes.
I don't know how it was so much kind of more finicky in that case than it would be in latter games. You just think you could kind of iron that out. I don't know whether it's because they didn't want it to be too easy, to do because
Well, it's
you know
mandatory for progression, so.
yeah, that's the thing. Is at a certain point you have to kind of, and you have the little characters like teach you how to do it.
Yeah, no,
So
that's actually my fiance was playing Super Metroid on the NSO app for the first time as their first ever Metroid game like 7 months ago, and they physically could not do the wall jumps. They just got to the point where it's taught to them, they're like, I know what I need to do. I physically cannot do it. Like their reaction speeds are just fundamentally not fast enough, and so they just dropped off the
well,
game.
and also there might be a little bit of maybe the latency or something with an NSO version that would
Yeah.
make it a bit trickier. But I can remember playing it in '95, with the controller wired in, on a CRT. So this
Yes.
is Nola. It was like I said, it was finicky. It was like sometimes you felt like you could do it, and then another time it was like, no, I don't understand this, or I don't have it down.
Yeah.
It was weird, and there were a number of control things and just little interface things and stuff that were a little bit rough around the edges, but it was a great experience, and hopefully it wasn't too compromised by anything. I get like if you were getting into probably a bit too soon for this, but if you was getting into the idea of like speed running it to get the ending where Samus is less clothed or whatever, like
Yes.
maybe some of these problems were bigger issue on a PAL system, but I'd still go with a 9 on this. It's an incredible game, and I assume it was still a very good experience on the European system.
Okay. I'm sorry, did you say 9?
Yes, 9.
Okay. Uniracers.
Well, this got a lot of coverage, and I think reviewed rather well. I always remember seeing this, kind of as something that was well thought of. But and it would show on, as we said, we'd entered this sort of period in time where video games were on television now and again. And I remember uni races would show up like when they'd have like game shows would kind of oscillate in terms of like, are we covering new games, and how to, what's good, reviewing, them, or are we kind of doing like contests, people playing against each other at multiplayer games as a game show, in that sense, and uni races would show up quite a lot. That's where I would see it is people actually playing that in a versus setting. And it always had a good reputation, but I never did get a chance to play it. And as far as I know, it's not been re-released. So, yeah, tough for me to give it, a precise score. I'll go with a 7.
Okay. Stunt Race FX.
Yeah, so I was interested in this, because it was another FX game. Having loved Star Fox so much, and it's like, oh, this is the future. You kind of like, okay, well, what's the next, iteration? Where's the next place it's going to go? But even though I think it reviewed well, it didn't persuade the reviews at the time to invest that much in an FX. And I'm ashamed to say I've not really played it very much on NSO, because it was one of the things that's like, oh, I can actually play that, because it had not been on Virtual Console before. I don't know whether it's something that you necessarily would be that desperate to pay for outright anyway. But yeah, I've not actually played it. I mean, I've toyed around with it, but not to get into the substance of how good it is as a racing game. So I think a 6 for that one. But yeah, with all being said, that the one thing I can say for just the short time to play with it is the very small visible play area is
Yes.
an issue in a racing game. And that still remains the case.
Donkey Kong Country.
Okay, this was the Christmas present for the year 1994 for
Ooh.
me, and I believe it was pretty much simultaneous with Europe and North America. In the case of DKC, there wasn't some big lag. It was getting hyped up over here, in synchronicity with everything in the US. We had the North American version, of course, but it was, in the end, it couldn't help but be a little bit underwhelming because the hype was ridiculous. It
Oh,
was absolutely
yes.
ridiculous. Now, of course, I'm sure the hype machine was, Nintendo would they have the VHSs and all this, stuff that they were doing back then, or, Nintendo Power in America would have been pushing it really hard. But over here, I think there was a slightly different kind of hype. Not through like official promotional channels, but because it's like, oh, Rare, we've covered this very
Yep.
prolific developer that have made all these NES games and things. But now they've partnered with Nintendo and they're making this, cutting edge technology and all this stuff, and they had, and the thing is for the magazines at the time is they actually had access to these people.
Yep.
They could interview them and do these big features, and they could have all the rendered that they've made of DK on top of On Guard under the water and all this stuff, just blow your minds as a child of how amazing this thing was going to be. And then you play it, and it's a pretty good platform.
Yes.
That I mean, again, if I'd been a bit older, I probably would have had my expectations calibrated a little bit more, properly. But it was still enjoyable game, But it was quite easy and quite sort of orthodox as a side-scrolling platformer, which it certainly, I hadn't overdosed on them because you couldn't afford to with importing games, but
Yep.
still, I played my share and enjoyed them. I liked the genre, but it wasn't anything particularly totally out of the kind of genre formula that we already knew. So it was a good game. I enjoyed it. It's slightly disappointing, but that's not really
So were you
that. that relevant in retrospect.
Were you playing the American Donkey Kong Country release, or were you playing the Japanese Super Donkey Kong release?
Super Donkey Kong. Yeah, yeah. Well, we had the American release, and at that point, I think in most cases, or a lot of cases, we did go for American games because generally they would be cheaper. It
Okay,
was
yeah.
the import premium on American games was less severe by that time, and so if there was no like release date kind of advantage or that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, a lot of the time it might just be availability as well. Like sometimes because it was all kind of this grey import scene. It was kind of all over the place. Just like, well, what have they got at that time and what price? But with DKC, it was the American version. I would imagine, with Rare being Rare, that they probably compensated as well as they could for the PAL stuff and all that. So I don't think it would particularly have to mark it down for that. So I'll give it an 8.
Okay. Wario's Woods for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, so this is a weird one in the sense that I believe the was it like didn't Wario Woods for the NES come out in '95 or something? Was it after
In
this?
Europe, yes.
Yeah, so I mean it's a strange thing, isn't it, that we got this sort of Super Nintendo first and then NES later. But I really don't know what. I guess it was just the fact that maybe the kind of game it was that there was still interest, maybe from like older people or something in puzzle games on NES, so they thought that was worth doing, like a sort of coalition of older people and small children. I don't know, but yeah, Warriors Woods, I've never really put time in with it to judge, how sort of legit it is as a puzzle game design. It's never had the most overwhelmingly kind of positive
No,
perception that I've
it's
been able to see.
fine.
Yeah, so a 6.
Okay. Tetris and Dr. Mario, which it is a
Yeah,
compilation, and I don't usually put compilations of released software, but this is the first time both of those are making their debut on Super Nintendo, so I did.
that's really weird. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have kind of picked this out. I mean, I guess you're still in the era where Nintendo's publishing a great many things under the Tetris banner, including eventually Panel to Part for some
Yes.
reason. But so they were very eager to put out any kind of product with Tetris on it. But yeah, I mean, as we've already covered a bit, I certainly like Tetris and don't mind Dr. Mario either. So perhaps an 8 for that
Okay.
one.
Super Pinball Behind the Mask.
Okay, so Super Pinball behind. What the? I'm
I'm
trying
really
to.
excited about this one.
Is this a kind of pin bot situation at all? Is there some sort of tie into a genuine table, or is this purely let me see. Behind the Mask features 3 tables: the clown-themed Jolly Joker, the pirate-themed Blackbeard and Iron Man, and the fantasy-themed Wizard. So no, they're just kind of
Uh
their own
huh.
tables. Kind of, yeah, yeah. I really do like pinball, and I like video game representations of it. But it doesn't see it seems like it's another one of those cases where it's like you're trying to approximate tables, the kinds of things that exist in real tables, but in this case without actually being based on a real one, like Pinbot.
Yep.
Whereas, I gotta prefer the Kirby school, the way they did it with that, where you really lean into the fact that this is a video game and just have stuff that, fundamentally it's very pinball, but of course, but things that just aren't going to happen in a pinball in an actual table. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they've not seen it in action, kind of far that goes with this, but I think a 5.
Okay. What about Super International Cricket? Definitely a game
Well,
you imported.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is an interesting one because again, you've got to say we talked earlier about the kind of the game that was the magnetic football that was just for Germany, literally just for Germany. This game may have had a wider European release, but basically it would have been for the UK and I guess also perhaps for Australia and New Zealand because they would have fallen under NOE essentially, right? Like
Hmm.
it would have,
This was a this was bundled in as a console bundle in Australia.
yeah, they certainly do like cricket, and as do we, of course.
Yes, this was released in Australia, Europe, and also in India. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
it.
well, yeah, I mean, it's to
Yep.
say that cricket's a big deal in India is
Oh
one of the
yes.
bigger understatements that people can make. But yeah, I mean, obviously, again, like it's a kind of. It was interesting that how well it would have done anywhere else on the continent. You know, like
Yes.
I don't get particularly fussed about cricket, but you know, over here it would have been. It's another one of those that's kind of a catalogue type thing. You know, it's just a major um, sport in this
Yep.
country, so you kind of expect to see. As it was, see, Beam Software is listed
Yep.
as the developer.
No teams, no player licensing, only one stadium. Here's some cricket.
Yeah, so it's really just like you know, it's kind of like Super Soccer, but just years late, I guess.
Yes.
You know, kind of thing. So it may have been passable, but yeah, I'd probably go with a 5 on that one.
Okay. What about Plock?
Yeah, what about Plock? I mean, what is the deal with Super Nintendo Plock exactly?
I don't
Let's
know.
see.
When I search for it, it suggests I'm looking for the boss theme, which makes me really curious what the boss battle music is like in Plock.
Yes. So this is
This looks
so
like a fucking Amiga game.
yeah. Well, it says it's a side-scrolling game developed by Software Creations. Yeah, that is British, so that's kind of makes sense.
I mean,
Plock's history began in the late 80s as a self-funded coin-op project by the two Pickford brothers named Flea Pit.
yep. They programmed it for
They
Rare's Razboard.
Yeah, so that is an interesting because I do remember this getting covered, and I always sort of imagined it as being something that was had ties to the dim and distant past, but seemingly it didn't actually come out in the past.
No, wow, yeah, this looks like it had a hell of a journey. It was well received. Did not sell well because everyone had fucking mascot platformers. But every screenshot of this thing looks like it's a goddamn Amiga game. In
Yeah, well,
like,
I'm sure it was you know because they probably I think that was probably mostly what they
yes,
made, right? Like
right
that
next
was
to
the
Putty Squad in
yeah,
the
that's it.
lineup of what the fuck is this?
Yeah, and that's because I feel like it's one of the games that came recently to the NSO. Maybe did they make one of these or something? I forget exactly. They'd certainly made a number of things back at sort of around this time. But God, did they make? Maybe it was someone else. I felt maybe made the Alien 3 game or something. I forget, but yeah, I mean, seems like it was probably. It definitely got coverage, but I maybe it's the name. I just thought it was this like old thing. That was how I kind of perceived it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I didn't really pay that much closer attention to it. So I think we'll go with a 6.
Okay. Mega Man X.
Well, I mean, I really
50
like this one.
hertz.
Yeah, but that is the
I
question.
really don't think this was optimized.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff. Again, we worth mentioning, of course, yeah, that this is a case of NOE kind of, still picking up the Capcom scraps again, and more as we're about to discover.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
I mean, it really, really like this game. I didn't play it at the time. Again, it was one of these things that seemed really cool in the magazines and stuff. Having not sort of actually played any of the Mega Man games on NES and all that, it was kind of like, will I actually like it? And just didn't end up getting it. But having played it years later, it's really, really good. So, I mean, with the deference to some of the potential compromises, I think I'll give it an 8.
Okay. What about 50 hertz Super Street Fighter 2 with a border?
Yeah, that's really. I mean, what is going on there? That is. It's interesting that I guess
I mean, this
this
is
sort.
infamous.
I guess what's interesting about this, of course, is that so Capcom clearly have already published Street Fighter 2, other versions of it on the Super Nintendo in Europe. But now, when it comes to Super, it's they've kind of decided we've had enough and left it to Nintendo to do it in Europe. So I wonder if it's a case of just like I don't know, maybe is it selling better on Mega Drive at this point or something? Like, or mind you, I mean, or is it just maybe NOE gave them a sweetheart deal to publish it there, so that they could kind of compete with the Mega Drive version or so. I feel like there's probably some console wars bullshit going on
Mm.
with this one, more so than Mega Man X. Like Mega Man X, I could understand. NOE's already published some previous Mega Man games. Capcom maybe doesn't think it's that worth their while to do it themselves. Fine, but this is a case where they have been doing it themselves, and now it's gone over to NOE. So that's I feel like there's some console wars horseshit involved here. But yeah, I mean, I've not played the Super Nintendo version of Super. I had the Japanese version of the original Street Fighter 2, which was certainly, they would improve it, but it made a big impact at the time. I certainly enjoyed it and all that. But yeah, I would have thought, yeah, the compromises with the speed and stuff. I mean, I guess this wasn't necessarily the fastest Street Fighter 2 game in the first place because it didn't have the sort of as much sort of
Uh-huh.
variable speed as Turbo did. But still, yeah, it's got to have affected it. I think with fighting games, because with fighting games, the problem is even if you optimize for the speed, but then that means you're skipping frames on,
Yep.
with the refresh rate, that's going to screw things up.
I
So
have heard PAL versions of Street Fighter being referred to as unplayable.
yeah, so this is really tough to score because I think, clearly the game is of merit, but yeah, and it's tough to say that it just like completely undoes all that, but it is a problem. It really is. Like I remember remember reading reviews of, and I suppose we'll be covering this not too long, but the PAL version of Killer Instinct
Yes.
was a real problem with the all
Oh, we will
combos,
get there.
breakers. Yeah, so I think it's going to be a 6. It's a weird compromise based on everything, but yeah, that's it.
Okay. Secret of Mana.
Yeah, so I actually have. This was another game that I was actually able to get the PAL version of in '95, I think, and play it, on my Super Famicom, so it ran properly. Like I don't know whether the converter necessarily played nice with every PAL game. Like I think a friend of ours had a copy of Super Aleste that wasn't quite right when it ran through this
Yeah,
converter,
that makes
But
sense.
mercifully, Super Metroid and this Secret of Mana did run quite nicely. It wasn't a problem. So this was a chance for me to try this kind of game, which was a little obviously there was some overlap with Zelda, especially if he was just looking at it in a magazine. But I knew it wasn't just exactly a Zelda type game. That it had more RPG elements, and so it was kind of a nice way to dip the toe in the waters as to get a relatively affordable copy of this and then run it through the converter and play that. And I didn't ever manage to get really far in the game because I didn't quite fully. But I spent what felt like quite a lot of time with it at that time, and really the music and the graphics and everything were just. Sensational. So it was something I really enjoyed on that level. But gameplay wise, I don't think I ever really quite got comfortable with exactly what it was. That it wasn't, kind of a Zelda game, but then it wasn't like a turn based RPG either.
Mm-hmm.
So I think an 8 for this one is probably appropriate, but there's an argument. There's probably some argument to go higher, but it has some weirdness in terms of like bugs and
Yeah.
stuff got gutted out of it because it was a CD project that got cut down and adapted back into a cartridge and stuff. So I think an 8 is probably the most appropriate.
All right. You want to try and real quick knock out these last two Super Nintendo games before you have to go?
Yeah, well, I think we can make a run at the whole thing
Okay.
if I can possibly be more economic with my words.
Capcom Soccer Shootout.
Does this have something to do with Mega Man Soccer, or what is the deal with
I
this?
do not know. Let me quickly find that
Yeah,
out.
I need, because again, this is not a name that I've heard, and it's, of course, another Capcom product that's that's
Yes.
Japanese.
Capcom's Soccer Shootout Super Nintendo. Um, no.
No, okay, so it's an adaptation of a J League game from
Yes.
Japan.
And then
So,
it was actually specifically just called Soccer Shootout in Europe. It was called Capcom's Soccer Shootout in the Americas.
I see. So, yeah, so in the US, they were trying to sort of sell it to you by saying, well, maybe you don't think soccer's that exciting, but you like Capcom stuff.
Yes.
Whereas, yeah, I guess you didn't really necessarily need to do the selling point is that it is soccer.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I mean, the only soccer game that I really played for Super Nintendo, so I had FIFA. The first FIFA was around about this time. I think it was the end of '93 in
Yeah,
on
around then.
Mega Drive. We had that, and then latterly we had the original International Superstar Soccer for Super Nintendo, which was very well reviewed, and we certainly liked it a lot. As far as I know, because I just mentioned a little bit with the Super Soccer earlier on, I've looked into a fair bit about the sort of history of soccer games on Super Nintendo, and I've seen that kind of J League series referenced before. I don't think it's terribly remarkable. So a 6, I think, will be the appropriate one there.
Okay, Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures.
Yeah, so this is this bizarre, isn't it almost like a virtual pet thing?
Yeah, that's pretty much. It's
I
awful and
mean,
weird.
it certainly sounds sort of. I love how the fact that you really can't sort of. I mean, it's multiple things about it that's bizarre. First of all, just the fact that something like this existed when it felt like so many games was just like a game only existed if you could put it in an easy to sort of market box. Like it's a sports game, it's a shooter, it's a platform game. Where it's a game that had a sort of atypical genre was difficult to sell back then. I mean, I guess probably difficult to sell now. It always will be, but it was something that was really unusual back then. And then to just say, well, how we will sell it is we'll just say it's Pac-Man 2. it's,
Yes.
it's so it's ballsy, but arguably desperate. I guess like the marketing team was just like looking at themselves like, how do we sell this? So I don't. For the fact that it is so odd and seemingly it's not without sort of some creative merit or whatever, I think I'll give it a 7.
Okay. Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3.
I do like this quite a lot. Having we finally got to it on the virtual console, and I think it is much more of a bespoke Game Boy game than
Yes.
Super Mario Land 2 was. With the even though Wario is like massive on screen, like that is the funny thing is that Wario is a big character. So this is a situation where like you said, like oftentimes was a real drawback, a real drag
Mm-hmm.
on a Game Boy game. But in this case, it wasn't because you were just taking an NES game and that's the way you're adapting the visuals to a lower resolution. It was entirely a design around what the Game Boy could do and around the character of this size and importantly mobility. That he has this very weird mobility that's very un-Mario like, with this dashing, and he's
Mm-hmm.
kind of he's big and he's burly and all this. It's really quite a different feel. And mostly, really quite successful. Creating a side-scrolling platformer on Game Boy that just felt like it wasn't a compromise. It wasn't a weird thing. It was just a really nicely designed Game Boy game from the ground up. So I think an 8 for that one.
Okay. DK94.
Yeah, this reviewed super well back in the day. I didn't have a Game Boy game, but this reviewed so well. And certainly it was, obviously the year that there was all this DK stuff happening, and it was kind of like, oh, everybody's getting excited for, the CG graphics of, ACM, Advanced Computer Models or whatever, the
Yes.
acronym they use for the rare DKC, but it's like, don't sleep on this. This is fantastic. And so it always stuck with me. I was like, one day I'm going to play that game. And I actually got it as a cartridge. I played this on my GBA.
Mm.
And I think it was in the mid 2000s by the time I got around to that. And it is very good. Really, really good. Honestly, I don't know. It's another one of those, a bit like Link's Awakening, where I really don't know what more you could have done in terms of the remit is. It's a Game Boy game, and it's a kind of radical expansion or sequel of the kind of DK arcade lineage. And it's great. Like it's just really good. I think I'll go with a 10 on this one. I really
Okay.
again, not perfect, but I can't really think of serious drawbacks.
Tetris 2 for Game Boy.
Your further Tetris products. I mean, have we got anything in particular that differentiates this
No.
from the original Game Boy on that? Yeah, so I don't know. I guess just for, I mean, I'm sure the game is still worth higher, but just for the sort of, product lineness of it, I'll give it an 8 instead of like a 9 or something.
Okay, and then finally, Space Invaders for the Game Boy.
Yeah, so this is the one that includes a Super Famicom version on the cartridge. If you put it in Super Game Boy or whatever, basically
Something like that.
It's so small. There's so little data in it that you could actually just hide, but
Yes.
include a Super Nintendo ROM also on there. So when you put it in the Super Game Boy, rather than just the Game Boy game loading up through the Super Game Boy and having some colors and borders and stuff, it was actually a Super Nintendo version of Space Invaders that played and all that. So that is a fun inclusion, even if obviously I'm sure Space Invaders, at that point it was like a little bit, just to my mind anyway,
Played out.
maybe but yeah, the way it was talked about in the media was just kind of like, it's passe, it's like, oh, but still fundamentally a fun game, and I like them doing cool sort of weird use cases for things.
Yes.
So I'll give it a 7.
Okay. That does it for this week. No episode next week.
Yeah, so this will be the week where everything's misaligned. So yeah, in terms of we in the UK will be coming off daylight savings time this weekend, but it won't be until the following weekend.
Yes. So we are missing 1 week, and we will be back on Thursday, the 11th, 11/11.
Yeah, and then presumably, it's Skyrim Day or whatever.
Oh yes, I'll be too busy playing the 8,000th release of Skyrim.
This would be the 10th anniversary, wouldn't it? Because it was
Yes.
so many. That's the thing about marketing, even if it makes it easy to remember, it is a virtue because it's coming out on 11/11/11.
And Starfield is coming out on 11/11/22. That's not a joke.
That's pretty good. I gotta give. Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine we'll have to do something different for. Must admit, I feel a bit self-conscious about taking up your time most weeks, but Thanksgiving Thursday.
Oh yes, we'll probably miss Thanksgiving Thursday. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.